I'm Dr. Anita Mihai. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at City University of London, and I'm one of the chief investigators of the Fathers Together study. The Fathers Together team includes a group of researchers, practitioners, as well as people with lived experience of being in prison themselves. Having a parent in prison is associated with a number of really quite worrying outcomes for the children. What we start to see is an intergenerational cycle of trauma, of poor health and of offending, where having a parent in prison increases the child's chances of also being in prison later on in their life. This does not mean that children with a parent in prison will end up in prison themselves, but it is important to recognise that imprisonment of a parent reverberates throughout the family, throughout communities, and over time and over generation. We are working with 5 prisons where we are interviewing over 500 young adults. We want to understand how many of them are fathers and how many children they might have and are affected. Our aim is to adapt and deliver a parenting programme for young fathers in prison.
Well, I couldn't be a father whilst in prison. You know, I couldn't see my children, you know, and I suppose I made choices based on myself at the time. You know, I saw my son when he was a week old, and that was in prison. You know, I was in Campbell. You know, his mum travelled all that way just to show me this newborn baby, and at that point I thought to myself, I don't want my child coming to this place. I don't, you know. And she never brought him back again. I told her I don't want to see him, you know, not whilst I'm in prison. You know, this ain't an environment for a baby. If they had, you know, someone to support me, you know, asking me questions like, you know, first off, do I have children? Because that question was never ever asked when I came into the prison system. You're assigned a PO, your personal officer, and he should have been telling me, well, look, this is the support that we have in the prison regarding fathers with children, you know, and you can access this and you can access that. However, none of that was ever told to me. I don't even think they had that anyway.
So the impact on my wife was quite dramatic, really. I know that it was a lot for her to take because obviously I left her with 3 kids, small kids. She had to manage the house because I've got a house, so she had to pay the bills, pay the mortgage. She still had to work. I remember being on the phone to her, and she would tell me what's going on, but then my parents would tell her, and subsequently my sister and stuff would say to her not to tell me these things because I'm dealing with a lot of stuff in there. And I kind of wanted her to tell me what was going on because in one way it kind of kept me in the loop. I didn't feel like I'd just disappeared. But at the same time, obviously, there's nothing I can do about it. So when it would be things that would be affecting her, like emotionally or mentally, or if she needed, like, you know, she just needed my support, I couldn't actually give her that support. You know, she literally was like a single parent at that time.
I was stripped from being that father, physically, mentally, emotionally. I had to find a way to be a father from behind the door. So I spent more time to get to kind of understand them, asking them questions about themselves, you know, understanding their favorite colors. The relationships now with my children and you know, my children's mum, I've had to work on it, they've had to work on it, because Dad's returned home, you know, after 10 years, and he's setting us rules. I had to accept that they need to be trusted because they don't know if I'm gonna, you know, end up back in prison.
One of the things that would be important to me is just to not have a cycle repeat itself. So with me, where I never had a father figure in my life, I would have loved to have been in my children's lives. They're grown children now. They're not children now, they're grown adults. But to imagine for that whole period, just having pockets of time spending with them and not actually having a relationship with them, And something that's been very difficult for me is the fact that to not have that relationship with my own father, and then for the cycle to repeat itself and not have that relationship with my own daughters, that's something quite difficult to swallow. It's almost as though processing that whole, you know, you and your father as opposed to you and your children, and seeing it turn out the same way is quite disappointing, but it's also something that I've just had to work with and live with.
We know that prisoners who receive good family support and can form and maintain positive family relationships are less likely to go on to reoffend on release. We believe the programme is particularly important for young fathers in prison, as it helps them to reflect on their own experiences in childhood and their own struggles they may have had growing up, as well as gain real practical skills and knowledge on how they can be the fathers they want to be. This is what the Fathers Together study is about.